In the shadows of history's brightest victories lie corridors no map dares to show, sealed vaults of silence where the paper turns brittle and the ink bleeds into nothing. There are whispers of convoys that never arrived, voices that cut off mid-sentence, and evidence buried in the cold earth. We stand at the edge of a story others have tried to erase, staring into the black where truth and danger breathe the same air. On April 27th, 1945, at approximately 03:15 hours, a convoy of 3 Opel Blitz trucks departed the Tiergarten area of Berlin under thick smoke from Soviet artillery barrages. Eyewitnesses, mostly Volkssturm auxiliaries positioned near the Brandenburg Gate, later described the vehicles as unmarked except for small Reichssicherheitsdienst insignia on the driver's side doors. Each truck carried a lead-sealed crate, roughly 2.5 meters in length, lashed to the flatbed beneath canvas tarpaulins. The convoy was led by a single armored car, likely an ZKFZ 222, and tailed by 2 motorcycles without registration plates. Declassified in 1987 by clerical error, OSS Field Report 428 outlines an aborted interception attempt in the Harz Mountains 3 days later. According to the report, an American reconnaissance unit, E Company, 514th Parachute Infantry, acting on Ultra Intercepts, set an ambush on Route L96 near Hasselfelde. The convoy failed to appear. Instead, a Luftwaffe Kubelwagen arrived at the kill zone, unoccupied, engine running, with fresh mud matching Harz forest soil. The report states, in understated language, that primary assets did not transit projected corridor. No explanation was recorded for how the Americans knew to target that specific location. The document's annex contains testimony from Sergeant James A. Delaney, 514th PIR, taken on May 9, 1945, in Blankenburg. Delaney claimed his unit discovered recent tire tracks diverging from L96 toward a disused mining road, blocked by 2 felled pine trees. Beyond the barricade, the ground showed heavy indentation from multi-ton vehicles, but no crates or wreckage were found. "It's like they loaded them onto something else," Delaney remarked. "Maybe even aircraft. Heard engines that night, but no lights in the sky." British intelligence records, cross-referenced in 1946 under the Joint Intelligence Committee, reveal that the convoy's original movement order, signed by an SS Obersturmbannführer identified only as M. Adler, was filed under the codename Feuergeist. The order does not specify the cargo's nature, but 3 unusual directives stand out. 1. All crates to be transported in lead-lined containers. 2. No stops permitted for any reason short of total vehicle incapacitation. 3. In the event of imminent capture, destruction protocol Omega F to be executed without delay. The Omega F reference puzzled analysts. Surviving SS field manuals make no mention of such a protocol. However, in a fragmentary correspondence recovered from the Reichssicherheitsdienst central files in 1953, Omega F appears alongside words for thermal charge and containment breach. The letter is unsigned, and the recipient's name was obliterated by deliberate ink application. What happened after the Harz Mountains is unclear. Soviet archival material from 1968, opened briefly to East German historians before being resealed, mentions enemy convoy movements in Thale sector, unaccounted for by Red Army front reports. A single-page memorandum by a GRU Logistics. Officer notes cryptically, 3 units, missing, possible underground storage. The file, labeled Delo 19F, Case 19F, was reportedly destroyed in a 1972 fire at the Podolsk archive. In 1979, during a West German infrastructure survey in Saxony-Anhalt, a civil engineering team drilling core samples near the Harz, foothills struck an empty cavity 14 meters below ground. Within the cavity's wall was embedded a rusted steel plate, stenciled faintly with RSD FG3. When photographs were sent to Bonn, the find site was immediately fenced off and placed under Bundeswehrguard. Officially, it was declared a WWII-era ammunition disposal hazard and sealed with reinforced concrete. no public record exists of any excavation. Forensic review of OSS Field Report 4280 in the late 1990s by independent researcher Dr. Carl Hennings highlighted faint handwritten annotations in the margins, apparently made by an American intelligence officer during review. The word Feuergeist is repeated 3 times, each instance underlined in pencil. Alongside the final mention is a note, cobalt, gamma, dispersal risk. Hennings concluded the cargo might have been radiological in nature, though no declassified document confirms this. The convoy's personnel roster remains incomplete. 2 names recur in multiple intelligence summaries. SS Oberscharführer Ernst Horth, a logistics specialist attached to the Reich Main Security Office, and Lieutenant Kurt Voss, formerly of the Luftwaffe's experimental weapons branch. Both men disappeared in the chaos of May 1945 and were never registered as prisoners of war by Allied or Soviet authorities. Post-war sightings were rumored in Argentina and the Canary Islands, but none substantiated. A final anomaly surfaced in 2004 when the grandson of an American officer in the 514th PIR sold a trunk of military memorabilia at an estate sale in Pennsylvania. Among the items was a torn page from what appears to be a typed after-action report, bearing the heading, Addendum to 428 Euro. The text ends mid-sentence. Contact with Shadow Convoy confirmed. Vehicles bearing false insignia. Diversionary. Tactics successful. Feuergeist cargo transferred at... The rest is gone, sheared off with the missing half of the page. The absence of definitive answers has left Operation Feuergeist suspended between rumor and record. In the official OSS, Archive Index Report 4280 is catalogued with an unusual notation. Status: incomplete. Further detail classified until 2075. What remains are fragments, half-erased orders, diverging tire tracks in the forest, and the recurring impression from multiple independent sources that the crates carried something more dangerous than gold, art, or documents. The suggestion of cobalt, the insistence on lead shielding, and the complete disappearance of all primary witnesses point to a cargo whose recovery or exposure could not be permitted by any post-war power. Berlin fell. Days later, the convoy was never seen again. On the night of 14th of March 1952, at 23:07 GMT, a British signals officer assigned to NATO Communications Command in Northwood intercepted an irregular burst transmission on 6.312 MHz. The frequency was an exact match to an Abwehr shortwave channel, deactivated in May 1945. The message was transmitted in 4-second intervals, each block followed by a precise 22-second pause. The signal strength placed its origins somewhere along the Atlantic coast of France. The decoding team, operating under the Signals Research and Development Establishment, SRDE, reported the encryption as a modified Enigma M4 cipher. This particular configuration was historically linked to Kriegsmarine weather data broadcasts to U-boat wolfpacks during the final phase of the Atlantic campaign. By dawn, decryption revealed coordinate strings corresponding to remote sectors in the Soviet Arctic, accompanied by meteorological data in a format not used since 1944. The origin was traced with high confidence to a disused U-boat pen in Lorient, known to Allied intelligence as Base Karaman III. Officially, Karaman III had been gutted by demolition charges in August 1944 during the German retreat. A post-war French Navy inspection declared the site structurally unsound and permanently flooded. Yet, when a Royal Navy dive team was deployed on 28 March 1952, under the cover of routine harbour clearance, they reported an accessible inner chamber via a submerged tunnel. 12 minutes into the dive, all communications from the team became incoherent, marked by rapid breathing, muffled shouts, and an unidentifiable background hum. Divers surfaced in visible panic, refusing to return below. Their debriefing was classified under Psychological Compromise, Level 3, and sealed in the Ministry of Defense archives. On 6 April 1952, a joint British-French operation inserted a smaller recon team with Geiger counters and portable sonar into Karaman III's flooded entrance. Records indicate the team recovered 2 corroded steel containers. Their markings were illegible, except for faint stenciling of an alphanumeric code, NK1946K. Upon surfacing, both containers were immediately transferred to an RAF cargo transport bound for an undisclosed destination in the UK. French officials were not informed of the transfer. 3 days later, SRDE recorded another burst on 6.312 MHz, but this time it consisted solely of the number 0 repeated for 12 cycles. After this final broadcast, the frequency fell silent. The internal NATO memo referencing this incident was headlined, "Residual Network Kestrel." Its contents, partially declassified in 1994, suggest that the operation involved a surviving fragment of the German Naval Intelligence Network, either still active or revived under foreign control. Theories proliferated inside British intelligence circles. One group proposed that Soviet GRU had reactivated dormant Abwehr agents to collect meteorological intelligence for Arctic submarine operations during the early Cold War. Another pointed to the possibility of a German holdout group continuing wartime protocols long after the Reich's collapse, possibly in exchange for covert asylum in Soviet territory. The containers marked NK1946K were never publicly identified, but a redacted line in the 1953 Parliamentary Defense Committee notes refers to hydroacoustic anomalies consistent with high-intensity power sources in Arctic waters. Adding to the mystery, 2 of the Royal Navy divers involved in the initial 1952 descent into Karaman III died within a year, one from an aggressive form of lymphoma, the other in an apparent single-car accident on a rural road in Devon. No link was established publicly, though internal correspondence between naval medical officers suggests concern over prolonged low-dose exposure to an unidentified contaminant. In 1967, a retired SRDE technician named Colin Renshaw claimed in a private letter to a fellow cryptographer that the final 0 transmission was not a numerical 0, but a null character in modified Bodo code, effectively a sign-off signal. His theory was that the Lorient broadcasts were a scheduled check-in to verify readiness for activation, and the final transmission marked intentional termination of the network. Renshaw's letter was never made public during his lifetime. It surfaced in an estate sale in 1998 and was quietly acquired by an unnamed buyer. Today, the Lorient U-boat pens stand as historic relics, their massive concrete walls attracting tourists unaware of the sealed sections beneath. The official Ministry of Defense stance is that no operational equipment remains inside Karaman III. But buried deep within NATO's restricted archives, the file labeled Residual Network Kestrel remains active, with its review date extended to 2080. The 1952 intercept logs, the recovered containers, and the last terrified dive team testimony have not been released. What exactly the surviving Abwehr frequency was transmitting 8 years after the fall of Nazi Germany has never been explained. The unanswered question remains: who, in the winter of 1952, was still listening? In September 1991, following the dissolution of the Soviet Union, a junior archivist named Martin Keil was assigned to process unindexed holdings at the Bundesarchiv branch in Koblenz. Among the routine Wehrmacht payroll logs and Luftwaffe maintenance records, Keil uncovered a thin folder marked only with the Cyrillic word utro, morning. Inside were 12 aerial reconnaissance photographs, dated between August and October 1944, depicting a sprawling rail-linked industrial complex embedded into the northern slopes of the Carpathian Mountains. Each photograph carried Soviet notations, in red grease pencil, some as late as 1963, describing containment, thermal shielding, and vent systems. The location, identified through topographic features, corresponded to a remote sector near the Tisa River in present-day Ukraine. No Allied bombing surveys ever recorded the site, and no entry matching it appears in surviving Wehrmacht logistics maps. The Soviet annotations included references to Projekt Morgenwacht, a name absent from known German military projects. Curiously, one notation in 1963 refers to the installation as active under new management and secured by Regiment 6G. This suggests the Soviets may have reactivated the complex nearly 2 decades after its construction. To verify the find, Kyle contacted historian Dr. Anneliese Dorfmann, an expert in late-war German industrial dispersal programs. Dorfmann confirmed that the photographed structures bore no resemblance to conventional armaments plants. Instead, the complex appeared to integrate deep rail access directly into mountainside tunnels, with large exhaust stacks disguised as forest watchtowers. She noted that the closest parallel in German engineering was the Mittelwerk facility in the Harz Mountains used for V2 production, but even that comparison fell short. The Morgenwacht site seemed designed for something heavier and potentially more volatile. Within 2 weeks of his discovery, Kyle was found dead in his apartment from what police described as a domestic accident. His death coincided with an unscheduled Bundesarchiv audit that removed the Morgenwacht folder from circulation. Officially, the file was misplaced. Unofficially, several archivists recall men in plain clothes, neither police nor Bundeswehr, packing crates of documents into unmarked vehicles. Independent verification emerged in 1994, when declassified US Army Map Service charts from May 1945 revealed a restricted zone in the same coordinates, labeled L point, Bravo. The American notation offered no explanation, but a single marginalia entry reads, "Deep bore, unknown depth, rails still powered." The implication that electricity continued to run to the site after Germany's surrender adds weight to the Soviet claim of post-war use. Further fragments come from a 1957 GRU logistics memo intercepted by West German counterintelligence, which mentions Morgenwacht asset, containment breach risk, thermal shielding reinforced. The phrase containment breach has led some analysts to suspect hazardous material storage, possibly radiological. This theory gains traction from reports in nearby villages of livestock deaths and soil contamination during the early 1960s, which local Soviet administrators attributed to fungal blight. Aerial thermal imaging conducted covertly by a US reconnaissance satellite in 1971 recorded unexplained heat signatures emanating from the mountain slope, consistent with industrial machinery in operation. The images, partially declassified in 2005, show 4 discrete heat vents aligned along a rail spur leading into the mountain. Each vent was emitting at a temperature far higher than surrounding geological formations, despite the fact that no official records list any active industry in the area at the time. The present status of the site remains ambiguous. In the late 1980s, local hikers reported hearing low-frequency vibrations near the mountain during winter months when the ground was frozen and snow cover amplified ambient sound. Some described the vibrations as machinery running underground. By 1993, Ukrainian authorities had declared the area a restricted military zone, citing landslide danger. Satellite imagery since then shows minimal change. No new roads, no demolition, no civilian construction. Attempts to trace the origin of the Projekt Morgenwacht name have yielded little. One tantalizing lead comes from a fragmentary Wehrmacht engineering requisition, dated April 1944, that orders specialized shielding material, tungsten and lead composite for installation at Morgenwacht. The requisition was signed by an Oberingenieur, Hans von Kestrel, who was later captured by Soviet forces and disappeared into the Gulag system. The Soviet rationale for maintaining the site after the war is unknown. Some speculate it was repurposed for weapons research prohibited under international treaties. Others believe it stored captured German technology deemed too dangerous to dismantle. The complete absence of Allied reconnaissance during the war suggests the facility may have been camouflaged under the highest levels of Reich secrecy, with its existence known only to select SS and Armaments Ministry officials. What is certain is that Projekt Morgenwacht existed, that it was never destroyed during the war, and that post-war Soviet records treated it as both valuable and hazardous. Whether it still harbors machinery, munitions, or something entirely different remains sealed beneath the Carpathian rock. The last verifiable photograph of the site dates to 1963. Since then, its image has disappeared from every official map and aerial survey. The mountain stands quiet now, but if the Soviet annotations were accurate, quiet does not mean dormant. In February 1947, nearly 2 years after the war's end, US Army Counterintelligence Corps, CIC Unit 970, was dispatched to a remote airfield outside Giebelstadt, Bavaria, following a tip from a German engineer interned at Dachau. The source claimed an abandoned Luftwaffe hangar on the perimeter had been lined in lead and sealed since April 1945. On arrival, CIC officers discovered the hangar's outer structure disguised with weathered timber cladding to mask its true size from aerial observation. Inside, the corrugated steel walls were overlaid with thick lead sheeting, warped in places by heat damage. Scattered across the oil-stained floor were skeletal remains, at least 8 individuals, uniforms stripped, dog tags filed down. The bodies showed no visible gunshot wounds, but post-mortem reports noted a brittle, almost calcified condition of the bones. Among the debris lay a rusted cylindrical canister, 1.2 meters in height, marked in faded Cyrillic. Voyny, 4 GTA, military, 4th Guards Tank Army. This was unusual, as the 4th Guards Tank Army had been operating over 200 kilometers east in April 1945, nowhere near Bavaria. The canister's internal residue tested positive for a volatile chemical compound not catalogued in Western ordnance databases at the time. Initial analysis suggested a form of hypergolic propellant, highly reactive and dangerously unstable outside controlled containment. CIC internal correspondence labeled the investigation Operation Dark Ledger. A memorandum dated 6 March 1947 from Major Robert C. Alden to the Pentagon's Office of the Chief of Ordnance warned that the compound exhibits energetic properties exceeding standard hydrazine-class fuels, uncontrolled release possible via thermal exposure. Alden requested specialized containment equipment and chemical specialists from Aberdeen Proving Ground. The reply, sent via encrypted telex 3 days later, instructed Unit 970 to secure all material and cease all on-site analysis pending diplomatic review. Local German accounts added further anomalies. Residents recalled seeing Soviet-marked trucks near the airfield in early May 1945, weeks before US forces arrived in the region. No official Allied movement logs corroborate such an encounter. One farmer claimed that, on the night of 5th May, the hangar glowed faintly, as if lit from within, and that 2 loud metallic bangs echoed across the valley before silence returned. By mid-March 1947, all remains from the hangar were transferred to an undisclosed US Army medical facility. The canister, according to a redacted 1948 Ordnance Department inventory, was shipped under armed escort to the Aberdeen installation and classified under foreign propulsion samples, restricted handling. All documentation relating to its composition was subsequently removed from CIC archives, replaced with a notation. Records integrated into Special Weapons File series, accessed by written order only. In 1951, a Senate Armed Services Committee inquiry into missing wartime intelligence records briefly referenced Operation Dark Ledger. When questioned, Department of Defense witnesses stated that certain sensitive materials were repatriated or otherwise disposed of under Allied coordination agreements. No details were offered regarding the canister or the identities of the skeletal remains. The matter was dropped without public disclosure. A further complication emerged in 1964 when a former Soviet chemical engineer defecting in Vienna claimed that the compound described in Dark Ledger matched early prototypes for a rapid phase change fuel intended for a classified Red Army missile program. If true, this would imply the canister was not a German artifact at all, but a Soviet experimental asset somehow present on Luftwaffe-controlled territory in the war's final days. In the decades since, the site of the hangar has been repurposed. As agricultural storage, its original structure dismantled in the 1970s. No trace of the lead sheeting remains. Yet unconfirmed accounts from US Army veterans who served in Bavaria during the early Cold War speak of a fenced and guarded Zone Red within the old airfield perimeter, off-limits even to base personnel. Today, the surviving official record of Operation Dark Ledger consists of 3 heavily redacted CIC reports, 1 Ordnance Department inventory page, and a single grainy photograph of the canister taken before its removal. In the image, the Cyrillic stenciling is partially obscured by corrosion, but the number 4 and the letters GTA remain visible. The mystery endures. Why was an apparent Soviet chemical asset hidden inside a lead-lined Luftwaffe hangar, guarded or imprisoned by skeletal remains of unknown allegiance? And why, less than 2 years after victory in Europe, did Washington quietly terminate the investigation under the pretext of diplomatic destabilization risk? Some files are closed because the truth is mundane. Dark Ledger was not one of them. In January 1978, a Prague flea market vendor sold an unmarked reel of 16mm film to a retired Czech cinematographer. The buyer, accustomed to processing degraded wartime stock, was startled to find the footage intact and shot with professional steadiness. The first frames, verified through cross-reference with vehicle chassis registries, show a snowbound convoy moving at night through Silesia in early 1945. At least 6 trucks on flatbed transports, guarded by SS security units armed with MP, 40 submachine guns. The truck's cargo is shrouded under heavy tarpaulins, their silhouettes irregular and massive, far larger than standard field artillery. A panning shot reveals escort vehicles displaying improvised insignia not matching any known SS or Wehrmacht formation, possibly to avoid identification by Allied reconnaissance. One truck bears faint white stenciling on its canvas, Deceive Murmansk, under Polarlicht. Murmansk, during the period in question, was deep within Soviet-held territory and had never fallen to German control. Historians consulted on the WWII film's authenticity struggled to explain the apparent destination. Intelligence specialists noted that Polarlicht, German for Aurora Borealis, appeared in several late-war SS communications as a codename, though its meaning varied by context, sometimes denoting weather conditions, other times standing in for Arctic research operations. The Czech archivist who examined the reel in March 1978 concluded the sequence was shot by a trained cameraman traveling with the convoy. Occasional cutaways reveal men in heavy winter uniforms bearing unit cuff, titles removed or obscured. Their faces, when visible, display no standard issue insignia or rank markings. The convoy passes through at least 2 waypoints identifiable from wartime maps: Görlitz and Hirschberg, both under German control in early 1945, but close to shifting front lines. Analysis of the vehicles indicates that the film captures a deliberate, high-priority transfer, possibly of heavy machinery or experimental equipment, northward during the Reich's collapse. The route, if indeed intended for Murmansk, would have required either a negotiated safe passage through contested zones or transport aboard vessels via the Baltic, then around Scandinavia into the Arctic Ocean. No surviving Kriegsmarine records mention such an operation. Within 2 weeks of the reel's deposit at the Czech National Film Archive, NATO intelligence requested a viewing. A memo from the archive's director notes that after the screening, foreign representatives removed the original reel and left behind a second reel of unrelated footage for the file. The original has not been seen since. A single frame enlargement survives, showing a snow-swept forest road illuminated by convoy headlights, with one tarp partially lifted by wind, revealing a metallic surface with riveted plating, curved like an aircraft fuselage, but with dimensions inconsistent with any known Luftwaffe model. A former Soviet railway official, interviewed in 1991, claimed that in March 1945, an unmarked train arrived at Kandalaksha, on the Murmansk branch line, carrying 6 flatbed cars with oversized crated cargo. He recalled guards speaking accented Russian, as if rehearsed, and refusing to allow local workers near the cars. The cargo was transferred to military trucks and driven north toward an unlisted depot beyond Polarlicht. No manifests were filed, and the operation occurred at night. Speculation over Polarlicht ranges from theories about polar navigation experiments to the transport of dismantled weapons technology for testing in isolated Arctic ranges. Some researchers suggest that the convoy might have been delivering captured Allied material to the Soviets in exchange for safe passage for specific German personnel, an arrangement that would have left little trace in conventional military archives. By the mid-1980s, Cold War defector accounts began hinting at a joint Soviet-German wartime experiment involving high-altitude atmospheric phenomena in the Arctic. These accounts, though fragmentary, mention mobile generator assemblies and radiation shielding in connection with Polarlicht. The single surviving film frame, when digitally enhanced in 2004, revealed markings on the metallic surface beneath the tarp, a sequence of numbers beginning with 42, followed by partially obscured digits. The prefix matches known Luftwaffe equipment inventory codes for experimental airframes. The Czech cinematographer who purchased the reel in 1978 died in 1981 from an aggressive illness. His family reported that in the months before his death, he received anonymous phone calls at night, always brief, always silent after the first 2 seconds. The last time his widow saw the reel, it was in a sealed tin marked with the year 1945 in faded pencil. 2 weeks later, it was gone. Today, the Polarlicht convoy exists only in a single photographic frame, a handful of declassified but inconclusive NATO memos, and the recollections of witnesses who have long since passed. Whether its destination was truly Murmansk, and what cargo it carried through the collapsing Reich into Soviet hands, remains a gap in the record, a frozen road disappearing into the darkness of history. The files close with the weight of stone, but the silence is not empty. Beneath the layers of redacted lines and broken testimonies, something still moves, quiet, deliberate, patient. We are left with fragments, and in those fragments, the shape of a truth that does not want to be known. The past hasn't finished with us. It waits, buried, until someone dares to unearth it.